I've always believed that trees remember. They hold the wind, the ash, even the scent of rain in their bark. They witness things we forget. When I first bought that patch of land at the edge of Pine Hollow, a long, sloping lot the realtor called useless backside buffer, I didn't see it as useless at all. To me, it was the one place I could finally breathe. I spent 28 years with the U.S. Forest Service, 28 years watching fire, flood, regrowth, loss. I've stood knee-deep in soot where homes used to be, handing stuffed bears to trembling kids while smoke still lingered in the air. I've walked charred paths with widows who couldn't speak. So, when I retired, I didn't dream of ocean views or fancy golf courses. I wanted quiet trees, a place to remember and heal. That's why, after moving into my modest two-story home on Ridgeway Trail, the first thing I did was plant a windbreak, a zigzag row of Austrian pines, native junipers. Trees tough enough to bend with the wind and hold the slope when the rains came. I paid for every seedling myself, tracked every planting angle by compass, and worked closely with a state reforestation advisor who'd once been a rookie ranger under my mentorship. This wasn't just landscaping. It was living infrastructure. I documented it all. Back then, the community was quiet about it. The HOA board president, Mr. Tanaka, a retired postal worker with arthritis and a gentle smile, glanced at my plan and said, "If you can keep the deer out, go for it." And I did. Years passed, and the trees grew tall, forming a solid curtain that caught the northern winds before they blasted across the open field nearby. Winter cut the wind chill by 10 degrees around my house. Summer brought shade and nesting birds. Neighbors joked that my yard looked like it belonged in a ranger's calendar. I mostly kept to myself, no interest in wine tastings or monthly garage cleanups. I paid my dues, followed the rules, maintained my home and trees. That was the quiet pact. I gave no trouble, and none was given, until 2 months ago. It started with a folded paper taped to my mailbox. Notice of Vegetation Review, Lot 116. The language was vague at first, talking about maintaining visual consistency and eliminating overgrowth. But then came the kicker. The board has identified excessive natural screening and non-standard perimeter foliage that may pose aesthetic or safety risks to adjacent properties. I stood there, coffee in one hand, notice in the other, staring at the word excessive like it was a personal insult. I didn't panic. Bureaucracy like this was familiar, people with too much time and not enough understanding, hunting for problems where none existed. So, I wrote a calm, respectful letter. I explained the origins of the planting, the soil retention benefits, the shade it provided. I attached photos, diagrams, even the original soil survey from 2001. No response. 2 weeks passed. I thought maybe it was dropped. I even saw one board member, Rick, walking his dog past my driveway, and he waved cheerfully. Turns out, I was wrong. While I was away visiting my son for the long weekend, my neighbor Maria, an elderly woman who always bakes too many muffins, called me in tears. She'd heard loud chainsaws and saw contractors tearing through my windbreak. They marked trunks with orange paint and cut them down cleanly, hauling logs away, tossing limbs into chippers. When she tried to stop them, they showed some kind of paper authorization, they said, and kept going. By the time I got home, all that remained were pale stumps, dozens of them, flat-topped like open wounds. The slope looked naked, harsh, unanchored. Wind blew freely, dust swirling in corners where pine needles once danced. They didn't just cut trees, they erased part of me. I stood there, fists clenched, breath shallow, trying not to shake. My dog, Tiller, a big Labrador with one ear that never stood straight, sat close and whimpered softly. I don't remember walking back inside. I don't remember taking off my boots. I only remember the cold realization. This wasn't a mistake. They meant to do this. And worse, I had no idea why. 3 days later, I met Karen McClintock for the first time in person. She was the HOA president, the type who wore pastel jogging suits, always with a clipboard or phone in hand, too busy for hellos but full of authority. The clubhouse lobby buzzed with the usual crowd of retirees and yoga moms. I arrived just before the meeting, carrying a binder and a printed aerial map. Karen stood at the head of the folding table, flanked by Rick and a woman I didn't recognize. Her voice was smooth, bright, but cold, like someone who'd practiced friendliness but never quite meant it. She launched into what she called exciting progress in the Perimeter Beautification Initiative. Photos flashed behind her. The before shot proudly showed my trees. The after showed bare earth and stumps, labeled clean and code compliant. The room murmured approval. I raised my hand. Those were my trees, I said calmly. Karen's smile froze. She claimed the area fell under HOA jurisdiction, a 30-foot perimeter zone they had authority to maintain. I held up my map, surveyed, GPS confirmed. It was private property. She dismissed it as not the place to dispute boundaries and invited me to submit a grievance. I did. Twice. No response. She claimed the trees were a hazard, deteriorating, and the community was grateful they'd been removed. I told her flat out, they were healthy, federally funded windbreaks, destroyed without permission, exposing the neighborhood to danger. She asked if I was threatening them. I said no, nature was. Rick whispered something to her. She waved him off, told me to speak with their legal liaison. That was the end of the discussion. I went home, sleepless, flipping through years of documentation, letters, soil surveys, conservation approvals. I had proof, but they acted like I was just a crank with backyard weeds. The next day, I filed a complaint with the city zoning office and the state environmental department. I called Nancy Yates, a friend from the urban forestry division. She remembered the windbreak, said the HOA's unauthorized removal could mean serious liability, especially if wind damage occurred. And that was my biggest fear, because without those trees, nothing stood between the clubhouse and the screaming valley winds that barrel down the ridge every fall. When I drove past the clubhouse the next day, I saw new patio furniture, umbrellas, flowers, glass panels, completely exposed, unaware of what was coming. It felt surreal, like waking to find your memories vandalized. The stumps still oozed sap, the soil was sunbaked, the hillside a raw wound. No one had knocked on my door to ask. Maria's voice replayed in my head. She told the crew it was my land, but they said they had orders. I'd been visiting my son and newborn granddaughter, but I drove back overnight, white-knuckling the wheel, whispering, they wouldn't. They couldn't. But they had. The crew hadn't just cut trees, they'd scraped soil, shredded saplings, rutted the slope with tires. Whoever hired them didn't know how to handle sensitive terrain. It was like watching someone tear out a scar that had slowly healed over decades. I filed a police report. The deputy took photos but seemed unsure why it mattered. HOA says they thought it was common area, he said. I thought about selling, but I didn't act. I sent certified letters to the HOA board, landscaping contractor, insurance firm, and my lawyer, August Renner. A quiet man with a steel-trap memory and a knack for dismantling opposition without raising his voice. He said we'd file a tort claim and see if they wanted to settle or play hardball. Karen probably thought she was untouchable. The slope was already starting to wash out. A surveyor I hired confirmed the risk. A hard rain or wind would cause serious erosion. For days later, the weather alert came, a wind advisory, gusts up to 55 miles per hour. I watched the clubhouse, just downwind, exposed like a glass house in a hurricane. Workers set up for the fall festival, oblivious to the danger. The wind came like a predator, searching for resistance. Without my trees, it found none. Glass shattered, tables flipped, and the east-facing wall of the clubhouse, made of unreinforced glass panels, broke with a shotgun crack. Parents grabbed kids, vendors scrambled, and a decorative cauldron started smoking. Karen appeared, frantic and disheveled, shouting into her phone. Fire trucks and sheriff's patrol arrived. The sheriff looked at the damage, then at me, nodded briefly. The next day, my lawyer called. The HOA's insurer and counsel were already reaching out, asking about mediation. I said yes, only after they acknowledged what they'd done. At an emergency HOA meeting, the room was packed. Neighbors showed up uninvited, eager for answers. Karen looked rattled, clinging to her authority. When I spoke, I didn't bring papers, just my voice. I planted those trees because this land remembers, I said. They weren't decorations. They were armor. And when you remove nature's defenses without understanding what they hold back, you invite disaster. The room was silent. No applause, just reckoning. A motion passed to consult city planners, environmental advisors, and legal counsel. Karen was the only dissenting vote. Later, I received a letter accusing me of negligence, claiming I failed to warn the board and allowed an environmental hazard. It was absurd. My lawyer said she was panicking, trying to muddy the waters. We pushed for mediation. The local paper ran an article exposing the case, calling it a study in HOA overreach and environmental negligence. The story spread. The seed was planted. Mediation was tense. We presented proof, deeds, maps, surveys, videos. Karen's team argued I hadn't shared risks. The mediator concluded the HOA acted without authority and